when you work in a cross-functional role, right, whether it's customer education, customer marketing, so much of your work is dependent on influence, right? You're not responsible for these other people. You're not leading those teams. And so you're leaning on people that you've built relationship with to do data analysis or to get subject matter expert insights or for them to advocate and promote your programs and to be as hype about it as you are. I know Kristine and I talk a lot about having a plan, a strategy, right? I think it's very easy to have an idea and go to implementation. And sometimes you have to pull back and think, okay, well, like what are the problems that we need to solve in the business? Is training, is education the right solution to those problems? If so, how might training, education help to solve those problems?
Spotlight, brought to you by CSN Focus, where we refine customer success, uniting GTM teams across North America. Hello, everyone. Welcome to LinkedIn Live, CSN Focus, and we have two guests today. We have Kristine Kukich from the Training Shepherd, and then Shannon Howard from Director of Content and Customer Marketing from Intellum. Thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Glad to be here. It's good to see you all.
Yeah, it's great to see everybody here. Now, one thing you don't know is that they also the host for Mixology. So tell me a little bit more about Mixology, your YouTube channel.
Mixology is a YouTube channel that focuses on specifically on customer education and customer marketing as the scale engines to customer success. And we started all off with a cocktail. So when we get going, we put up a recipe and give you a chance to make that recipe and then sit down and join the conversation that Shannon and I have around a myriad of topics for customer education or customer marketing. It could be anything. We're on our second season now. So we're on just getting ready to release another episode probably by the end of this week.
Oh, amazing. That's our topic today. We're going to talk about the cocktail about customer education and customer marketing and why it's so important today. The value of customer education, the strategy impacts. Thank you. Now, before we dive in, I just have a little quick question, just for the audience here. If you just tell us like where you are and what discipline you're in, feel free to put in the chat. This is LinkedIn Live, so we'll answer any questions from the chat with our two guests, Shannon and Kristine. All right, let's dive in. Can you describe the value about what does like customer education, like why it's so important today in the customer success journey?
Why is it so important? So Kristine kind of mentioned this with Mixology, right? That customer education, customer marketing, different functions, but both scale engines for customer success, right? So we want customers to be successful, not just users of our product, but also just successful in their careers. And they happen to do that, hopefully using our products. So we want to help them be successful. And customer education, customer marketing are two functions that really can help to do that at scale, right? We can't one-on-one every single customer, especially as our company grows. And so these functions become even more important as the number of customers grows, number of users, accounts, however you're kind of measuring that. How we're serving those customers is often through those scaled programs in marketing and in education. And so we've seen, just actually Intellum commissioned a study from Forrester earlier this year to understand the business impact of customer education. And the numbers were super promising. 86% of programs see a positive ROI, 96% at very least break even. On average, it leads to a 26.2% increase in customer satisfaction, 22.3% increase in average retention rates for products targeted by training. So we're just actually seeing these measurable business impacts from these types of programs. Kristine, what would you add?
And it ties in very closely to the motions that we're starting to see in the CX side of the equation, where we're really beginning to focus more on expansion and the ability for our customer base to grow in the product that we have, in addition to gaining new customers, right? And so customer education and customer marketing both can help scale that opportunity for information flow to get the right information in the right hands of the people who use the product, right? And we can see a distinct line of what happens with trained users, right? Users that are learning more about your product become more engaged users over time, which leads to, in many cases, some form of expansion because they begin to really understand how all of the pieces work together in ways that someone who does not take that learning does, right? It gives them an opportunity to become more in-depth users of your product. And depth and breadth are part of expansion, right? It's the idea of getting a deeper dive into what they already know and a breadth of product usage. And that is what can help drive additional business. I think it's really a no-brainer from my perspective. And then Shannon listed some really good metrics that are just a part of it. The only other one I think I'll add to that is being able to identify in your organization what a trained user looks like. Because I talked with Tom Studdart, who's at Payscale now, a couple of probably about a year ago now, and the concept there is if you can identify a trained user, you will be able to correlate. And against Adam Avramescu's, right? No causation, correlation, not the same thing. But you could correlate that trained users do things differently. And if you can identify the course or courses or knowledge path that a trained user takes, you can then make that a part of implementation orientation activities at the beginning so that you're building solid, successful users from the get-go. So that's my little TED Talk on trained user activity.
Talk about all these great impacts. How do you measure them? This is how do you show, what metrics do you show the impact of what you just, the customer satisfaction, retention, how do you track trained users?
Systems. Now, but maturity in tracking is also a part of this, right? If you're starting an education program, the metrics that you're focusing on may not be the same as an intermediate style program, as an advanced program, as an enterprise program, right? Each of those levels creates a specific focus. And we had a conversation, oh gosh, I don't even remember how long ago it was, where Shannon and I talked about the idea that you have to speak the language of your business, and the metrics of the business should be the metrics that are important to you. So if you're measuring ROI as a business, then you need to be able to tie your data to ROI through identifying who's taking what courses are pushing the needle in terms of adoption, right? Where are you certifying, right? Emma, you just did a post yesterday, day before yesterday, on how certification is kind of falling out of fashion. I would argue that's not really quite true. I think the data is telling a little bit of a right. Go ahead, Shannon. Yeah, talk to that one.
I think it's telling a little bit of a skewed story. I think a lot of people started potentially with certification and are now investing in other types of educational resources, but certification is still has a place, which we'll talk a little bit about later. But to your point of like keeping in mind what matters to the business, I think it's very easy to talk about the metrics that are most easily accessible to us, right? So, okay, the number of certifications that are awarded, courses completed, number of users on our platform. And I call those like hype metrics, right? In the early days, you're talking about it like this is the best thing since sliced bread. And we're going to shout it from the rooftops because we're trying to get people excited about what we're doing and show them that we're trending in the right direction. But ultimately, we want to be able to measure that business impact. And so we want to be thinking about those metrics that matter to the business. We want to be thinking about how does this impact not just client retention, but net dollar retention? Are we seeing an increase in revenue expansion from those customers that are engaging with our educational materials, assets, content? Are we seeing revenue coming from, new revenue, right? People who are engaging with our education content, maybe in the marketing and sales cycle. Are we seeing those deals more likely to close? Which, as Kristine said, like it's a lot of system stuff, but I would also encourage people make friends, right? Like I I
Mhm.
can do very rudimentary data analysis, right? And General Assembly has a great course on data analysis. You could take the first one for free if you want. And honestly, like that'll get you a good percentage of the way there, like being comfortable just collating spreadsheets and like matching up data and doing your own analysis. But make friends with someone in data science, BI, data analysis, like whatever it is that you're, yeah, RevOps, BizOps, whatever your company has, like in terms of data resources to understand, even if you can't access, right? Because sometimes we don't have access to all the systems. If you look at people who have engaged with content over here, are they more likely to retain? Are they more likely to expand? Do they have higher contract values? Like what can I show that there's some kind of relationship, to your point of correlation or causation? Can I show there's some kind of relationship between consuming education content and then how that customer then behaves from like a revenue perspective?
I actually have an interesting comment from the audience about certification. I could bring it up to the screen. Pam said certification are expensive today and companies are tightening. So what do you mentioned a lot of workaround, right? You track content consumption. What other things that we can do?
There we
Any
go. There's
longer?
the other comment from Montreal, right? Certification has the
Okay.
benefits, but we're no longer living in the world where a Google AdWords certificate is going to make you suddenly the most sought after person in your company. Again, it is certification does two things. It allows you to focus very specifically on product knowledge, right? So giving people a path to product knowledge is a good thing, particularly if you're in the business of channel partners, right? Whether you have implementation partners or of your product, that gives you a way to standardize how they see your product so that you can teach them the right way to implement or the right way to sell your product based on the way that you believe it should be done, given the fact that they're a partner with you, right? So there's that part of it. It also, for education, particularly those education teams that have a profit and loss line item that they're responsible for, gives you an opportunity to create money, because in many cases you may not charge for the courses that you take, but you may charge for the certification itself, which then gives you an opportunity, to Pam's point, right? Certifications can be expensive. They don't have to be expensive, but in the belt tightening world that we have lived in for the last couple of years, maybe 2.5 years ish, and I don't know that it's going to go away anytime real soon, but it does give us an opportunity to create a monetary line item. And there historically, with customer education, has been the thought that if you can bring in money and you can pay for yourself to a certain extent, then you have a seat at the table. I would argue that's not always true, but it is a way for you to set up some and establish some bona fides in the conversation, in the financial conversation. And to Shannon's point, make friends with your financial people, right? Your CFO and anybody in the high level kind of
This is
idea.
a great transition to our next question. What are the key elements about building a successful customer education program?
And that's the starting point, right? Shannon
Yeah.
spoke to it already, right? Make friends across the organization for the understanding of your business. I had a conversation last week with a colleague who was trying to figure out how to really understand. And I said, go to finance, set up a meeting with your CFO and say you want them to be your mentor. You need to understand the business in order to help the business grow. And you really can't do that if you don't know what the business goals are of the organization. And in some orgs, it's not clear. You may have a mission statement and a vision statement, and you may have plans, but you may not really understand how the plans that you make as an individual contributor, as a manager of a team, as a director of a team, you may not understand how those things link together. And it is incredibly important that you make friends so that you can understand the business as well as leverage all of those other people in times of need. And Shannon is the ultimate in matching people up. So go to speak to that one.
I don't know. Now everybody's getting my ulterior motives for now. I mean, I'm a personable person, but it also helps to know people, right? I think when you work in a cross-functional role, right, whether it's customer education, customer marketing, so much of your work is dependent on influence, right? You're not responsible for these other people. You're not leading those teams. And so you're leaning on people that you've built relationship with to do data analysis or to get subject matter expert insights or for them to advocate and promote your programs and to be as hype about it as you are. I know Kristine and I talk a lot about having a plan, a strategy, right? Like I think it's very easy to have an idea and go to implementation. And sometimes you have to pull back and think, okay, well, like what are the problems that we need to solve in the business? Is training, is education the right solution to those problems? If so, how might training, education help to solve those problems? And we're coming up with like more of a strategic plan for how are we going to roll out education and what are those goals, those metrics that we have associated with that, right? So it's like we believe that if we do X, we're going to see Y result and we're going to measure that in this way, right? If you can put together that cohesive sentence, like we're on our way to having a more formal program. And I think too, like to Kristine's point of like, who are you educating, right? So often we start by thinking about our customers, but employees need to learn how to use our platforms too, or they need to learn our industry as a whole, right? Like I'm very big on this for marketing and sales teams is I don't want you to just learn the product. It's actually maybe potentially less helpful for you to learn the product. It's more helpful for you to learn the context that our product sits in. And so how do I teach you the industry that we work in? Do you have partners, right, who are implementing, who are selling, who are servicing your product in some way? So you might have these different audiences. And in this world where we're being asked to do more with less, I think education can take this lens of how do I take this piece of content that could be served to multiple audiences to solve multiple business problems? Because everybody has maybe some of the same needs for information education. So those are some of the things I would think about in the beginning. And then Kristine and I always talk about too about marketing and promotion, right? Like we don't want to create something and then never tell anybody about it. We want to actually like go with a splash into the market the same way that we would with a product, right? When a product goes to market, it doesn't just like ship it in the middle of the night and nobody says anything. Hopefully, sometimes it happens, but we want to actually have a plan of like, how are we going to make some noise about this? And how are we going to promote this? How are we going to get this into people's hands, encourage people to come back and continue learning with us and thinking about that, right? So thinking about the whole thing.
And help us iterate, right? Because part of effective strategy is understanding that iteration is also key, right? It's really, it's really important to be able to do what Tracy says, right? You can see this in the quote that Emma just put up on the screen, right? We need to tie everything back to organizational goals and KPIs, et cetera. And then we also need to realize that it never ends, right? Iteration is incredibly important in the way that we build and grow and mature our programs. And you can't do that if you didn't make friends, right? You can't get the guidance you need, you can't get the help you need. And if you don't understand your audience and how many audiences you have, it is really challenging to be able to build a program that people will talk about on your behalf because you haven't been clear enough with the right audiences in the way that things behave, right? In the way that you want to get the word out to those particular groups. So it's super important to be able to have a communication strategy that ties in to your iteration activity. And beta testers, man, find as many people who will help you and test for you and help you learn as you possibly can. I think those, if you take all of those and put them in a box and then shake it up and then, have the dice come out, what you'll end up with is a pretty solid action plan, right? Basing it, of course, on what you do for the basic strategy for the organization, right? It all goes back to you have to be impacting the organization. If you're not, it will be incredibly challenging to keep your program alive.
I always have a question. What is a reasonable time bound to put in to see ROI? Is it 90 days, 30 days? Do you usually put like a time limit to all your KPIs?
That's a good. I think some KPIs you would have a time limit. We expect to see this in this time frame. But then for other things, right, if you're going to impact retention, for most of us, it's going to take a year or more to actually see the results and the impact of that. So you might look at what are some of those like leading indicators that we're trending in that direction. I would have to pull up the Forrester report did have kind of like a payback period for education. I want to say it was like a year or two is when people were starting to see an ROI on their investment. Well, that's repetitive. It's like ATM card, but they're starting to see a return on their investment. Yeah, I would have to go look at, because they did put that in there.
I would say that you need to give yourself, for the ROI piece of it, really about 18 months. Without a year and a half, because you're going to hit people in the various cycles. Particularly if your renewal strategy is based on a contract date and not some kind of annual renewal, right? So regardless of when they join up, the new year always starts on March 1st, right? And if that's the case, then it's a little bit easier because you have a defined period, right? You know what the 12-month span is. But if the term is based on the contract renewal, right? So it's a year out or 3 years out from the date that they signed the contract, or the date that they initiated the first login, or again, whatever your contract states for that counter to start for your product, then you need 18 months from there, because you need to get them past that point. The work that we know about churn says that many customers will make the call within the first 90 days, right? And what you'll see is behavior after that 90 days that is a leading indicator to churn, right? You'll see lack of engagement. You'll see people choosing not to implement parts of the product that they had been talking about as part of the sales process. Right? You'll see all of these behaviors that can indicate that. Now, can education actually turn that around? Maybe, right? It depends, right? That's my book title that I'm going to write someday. It depends. But I think that if you see those leading indicators from a churn perspective, pushing knowledge is not necessarily a bad thing, as long as you're doing gentle pushes and you're not, baseball batting people, or cricket batting for those of you that are cricket fans.
Yeah.
So I think that's part of your strategy, right? Is understanding that this is not a short-term solution. This is a long-haul solution with short-term goals that we can hit and measure against to keep things moving.
I guess what are the common mistakes you see when we're pushing this customer education program out? One, expecting short-term turnaround.
That's real. And I like to too keep in mind, a lot of teams face that, right? It's like a product launches and we think it's going to have like a high percentage of adoption early on. That's not true, right? That's never true. Or marketing teams constantly, we're short on MQLs or whatever it is, and you have that fire drill every quarter. So I think all teams deal with that, like unreasonable expectation of short-term versus long-term thinking. So I do want to just say, like, we all deal with that. And so that's normal and to be expected. And that's part of why we are looking at those leading indicators and we're getting people excited and we're learning how to tell the story of like, hey, we're trending towards success, right? Every team, every leader has to learn, how do we tell the story that we're trending towards success when success is going to take more time than some people are probably comfortable with. But so I think one thing is moving too quickly. Another one is not formalizing education, right? So it's like, it's a little bit of this and it's a little bit of that, and it's done all over the place, and it's not cohesive, it's not strategic, and it's not always done well, right? So you see this in like help articles that have 17 different formats because like random team members, and there was no standard of excellence for the format, right? Or people who aren't trained in instructional design or learning experience design, creating learning content. And this is where we see a lot of like webinars retrofitted into an academy. And I'm like, it's not the same thing. It's not the same thing. It wasn't designed for that, right? So people who can actually like think about how do we help people learn, because that's a skill set in and of itself. So not to say, I think a lot of companies start really ad hoc, but if you want to make an investment, you want to actually see education move the needle, it has to be more thoughtful than just random acts of content creation.
Kristine,
I would also say that you need to understand and understand your audiences and build to your audience. Tracy's actually asking a good question about this right now. where she's got, if you have customer segmentation, are you designing different education materials and events based on this segment? And I would say it's a maturity thing, right? If you're initially creating content, then sometimes you don't have the luxury of creating content for an end user versus an administrative user versus an implementer user versus, all of the audiences that you might have. And so you start with something that's really more basic that can be leveraged and presented differently, even though the baseline content is the same. So that I can do a webinar in one case that allows the webinar discussion to be more expansive than it would be if I just showed them the knowledge base article, for example. But we're covering the same content, we're using the same outline, we're not necessarily redeveloping the content. All we're doing is allowing for expansion in ways that are easier, right? And I think a common mistake that we end up with is we try to build truly multiple sets of content for the different audiences that we serve, whether that's an enablement issue where we have partner enablement, we have sales enablement, we have internal enablement, we have customer enablement, right? Customer education itself. And assuming that all of those audiences are completely different when in fact they're not, right? Or if it is the levels of users of our product itself, where there are some cases where development needs to be different, right? It might be the fact that end users are not necessarily power users of your product. I call them casual users, right? They're people who have to come in and do an expense report once a quarter, maybe once a year, when they go to the big RKO, big event for the company, and they have to be able to track that, right? In-app stuff, DApp, all of the ability that you have to do in product opportunities there is enough, right? They don't necessarily need a why, right? They have to get their expenses done so they can get their credit card paid for. That's really enough why. And they just need to know how to fill it out. Versus a power user of your product that really does need to understand the whys, because they need to make better leaps with your product and fulfill their own use cases in ways that the casual user does not, right? And the same at each of those levels. We can still create the same base content, but we can wrap it differently for the different audiences, which has been my philosophy all along. It's just more in fashion now than it was when I started.
Yeah, more of that like modular content, right? Where it's like 80% is the same, and then we can do some bumpers around of like context setting, framing of that content based on the audience.
Yeah, I guess this give us a little bit more real life examples you've seen with your day-to-day work or client work. The next
Go ahead,
question.
Shannon, you can go first.
Go first.
Yeah, well, this is what I think is fun, right? Is you get to see, like in my position, I get to see the cool work that people are doing at smaller kind of scale up companies, and then at some of the world's largest companies. I got to go like to headquarters and see some of the things that people are doing, and it's so cool what people are doing with education and how it is actually making a difference, not just like pretty education or like cool education programs, but a lot of these companies, especially you think about education at some of those like really large global companies, their goal is revenue, right? Like that's why those companies are in business. That's why every company is in business, right? We got to make money to keep going and fulfill our mission. And so they're looking at education as a key part of that strategy, is how do we educate people to be better users of our platform, to sell on our platform, whatever it is. And that's where, earlier I mentioned we'd come back to certifications. With those companies, I'm seeing a lot of certifications, right? New certifications, improved certifications coming out, because there has to be, I think certifications are great if you need a degree of mastery, right? So Kristine was mentioning in-app. If I just need to learn how to do something really quick so I can move on with my life because I got to get this done now, I want an in-app, module. I want some kind of tour in-app, or I want a help article or a short video that's going to help me like just get that done quickly. But if I need to learn to any depth or extent some degree of competency, something, then I want to take a more formal learning path, right? I want to take some kind of in-depth training or certification. And so I think we're seeing these companies invest in those certifications because they're actually driving revenue. So I'm meeting with a customer later today to learn more about what they're doing in their program and how they're using certification specifically to drive revenue for their business and why they've invested so much money into education.
And I'm seeing a lot of, they're still really considered medium-sized SaaS organizations, but they're people that really have put together a super solid customer education program. This would be Courtney and the team at HubSpot, and the fact that this year they implemented cohorts in learning, which is a switch off in the way that we've done business in years past with customer education. We're seeing the success of teams like D. Capella at Miro that took the learning content at Miro from a pretty minuscule, basic type of activity into something that has turned into a gold standard in the business, right? If you want to see what a good academy can look like and a good structure, go to Miro and see what Dee and her team has grown into since she started there. I don't even remember how long ago now. Also, Shannon and I did an interview with Melissa Van Pelt at Seismic. And if you take a look at what they've done with education, that also a pretty big deal. They took something that was small and did it really well, and it grew. And then they did those things really well, and it grew. And then they did those things really well, and it grew again. And now Melissa is an SVP, and she's taken on community and a lot of the one-to-many aspects of the customer experience. And that, I think, is where we can see the success march happen if you start with a standardized set of goals, do those things really well, hit the marks that you said you were going to hit, or iterate against the failures. To be honest, failing is not a bad thing, as much as it is scary thing. And then your team can grow, your product can grow, because education is a product. Customer education is as much a product as anything else within your organization. And if you treat it that way, the growth will come because what you deliver will be solid, and you'll see the metrics start to grow and grow and grow and grow, and you'll hit your mark, right? Again, pay attention to what you talk about within the organization, manage your KPIs. Brian's been talking really about how to really focus what you build, right? If you see some of his comments here in the session, really identifying the sticky things and making sure you're making friends and building to the KPIs and OKRs within your organization. All of these things matter to build a successful program. You don't have to start grand. And if you aim for perfection the first time, you will never release anything. And that's pretty much just standard across everybody that talks about this kind of stuff.
Well, we're almost at time. Yeah. Is there like one last thought for the audience to think about customer education and impact strategy?
That's mine right there. Don't aim for perfection.
Aim for perfection, yeah. Shannon?
Not surprisingly, Kristine and I always agree, like just start with something. And I would encourage people too to iterate towards. So I worked with a team that would release courses, modules of a certification instead of just waiting till the whole thing was done, right? And we use that as a marketing tool to start getting content into people's hands and seeing if people were interested in what feedback that they had before we launched the whole thing. And I do think in today's business world, you do need to start showing value early on, even if you can't prove value, right? So we talked about you should expect it's going to take you 18 months to really be able to show the value of the work that you're doing to any kind of like reasonable, someone's going to be like, yep, totally. I see the data matching up there. But we need to show them that it's working. So part of that is execution and being consistent in that and like having a plan. And then also just continuing to tell that story. I think any position you're in a business, learning how to be a good storyteller and an advocate of the work that you do so that the business understands, right? No, like people who are in it, we get it, right? And we hope that it just makes so much sense to everybody else. Like I was telling you all before we started streaming today, how I was like terrified of my air fryer and I actually gave it away originally because I didn't understand how it worked. It just like cognitive load. I was like, I cannot do this. I cannot learn this complicated machine. And I think we have to like understand that other people don't always get it, right? Someone else like would just use an air fryer and they would not have the same like this I don't know, idea that something was going to be harder than it is. So like we all have this job of teaching people like, why is marketing important? Why is customer marketing important? Why is customer education important? Why is product important? You know, like we all do that work. And so getting really good at telling the story of the work that we're doing and why it matters and why education is so important, right? Because people don't, I think a lot of people hear, well, if we have education, it means that our product's complicated. Air fryer, case in point. Okay. Like it is not a terribly complicated machine. They sent me a little thing in the mail that tells me how to use it. And I like made it way harder than it was. Right. So it's the same with any other platform. People have varying degrees of technical competency and comfort, familiarity. Most of us are using 20 tools in our tech stack right now. So like learning something new is just cognitively a lot. And so we have to keep that in mind. Right. And that's why education is so important. But we need to keep telling that story and reiterating that to people so that they have that same, you know, conviction that this is really mission critical to what we do. It's at the heart of what we do is helping people to be successful with our product. I think that's really important.
Yeah. And Pam actually added a few more comments, how community become like critical pillar to customer success, CX, customer education.
It's going to be, this is Pam's led up for our pyramid, right? So when we talk about giving people access to content, we have the Kristine pyramid, which is one point of the pyramid is community, the other is the academy, and the other is your knowledge base, right? So if you're giving people ability to access all of that content seamlessly, then you are building an easy way for people to learn and get the information they need, as well as the whys in the cases where the whys are important.
Well, we'll have to dig into more about the triangle next time. Well, thank you so much, Kristine and Shannon. What's the best way to contact you to ask for more questions?
LinkedIn. Yeah, go to, I am Kristine, Kristine Kukich, Kristine Kukich. I'm the only one in LinkedIn. So go ahead and connect with me there. Happy to make the connections. If you have any questions, happy to set up calls and talk about any of this and anything else customer education related. And of course, you're welcome to join us for Mixology on YouTube.
That was so clean. Just pulling that up, Emma.
Yeah, everybody tune into their YouTube channel, Mixology. It's really good. Every episode is full of insights. Thank you again, everybody, and have a great day.
Have a good day, guys.